Wherever you are in the world, welcome to another edition of Jerry's Take on China. And today we're not really talking about China. I've been doing some research into the USA recently and focusing on what's really going wrong there from an outsider's or a Chinese perspective. Some people aren't so happy that I make a few videos that are critical of the USA, but given all the things that are going on in relation to the USA, the pressure they're putting on Taiwan to stir up trouble, the constant allegations of human rights abuses, the military posturing, anger and jealousy over the Middle East peace deal, and outright petulance over the fact that China might be in a position to broker peace in Ukraine, I thought a bit of whataboutism was due. Where USA accuses China of not having a democracy, I say that's not true. China has a greater democratic process than the USA does because it involves the people. What happens when you involve the people in governance? You get better infrastructure, you get better health, you get a better lifestyle, you get improvements because the people ask, the government listens, and almost everyone is happy. What happens when the government doesn't listen? And this is why I'm focusing on the USA today. The people aren't being heard. Their voices are not important. What is important to a politician in the USA is how will they get enough financial support to bankroll their lifestyle and fund their next election. Take a look at a 2020 fact check which I've linked, which report that 48% of all members of Congress are millionaires. OpenSecret.org suggests that number is now even higher. When millions of people protest against something, but the government ignores their wishes, this isn't democracy. I remember the riots of the 70s and 80s. Then I saw the same riots a couple of years ago. A generation later, the government still hasn't fixed the problems that led to BLM. It just kicked the can down the lane. When governments stop listening to people, people start agitating. And that's what's happening now. But it's a lot more serious because some of those people who are angry and frustrated about the government not listening and who are agitating for change are also people who have sworn to uphold the law. The people sworn to defend the nation. Let's take a closer look. According to conservative politicians, the US Department of Justice and the FBI are being utilized as tools of the Democrats to keep political opposition in check. There may be some justification for this belief, but one of their complaints of angry parents being defined as potential terrorists actually appears genuine. Many conservative-leaning parents are anti-wokeism or anti-critical race theory. They're also owners of large collection of guns. Now, guns are constitutionally legal, and as recent events prove, they're very dangerous. It's easy to understand how one side of the political arena finds their demeanor threatening, while the other finds it quite acceptable. Whatever liberal-minded people might think, some parents don't want their kids exposed to ideals that they find offensive. They are genuinely, and it can be argued, justifiably threatened. Threatened people sometimes react aggressively, and indeed some have carried out aggressive actions. But domestic terrorist is not a label for them. They aren't terrorists. They're frightened parents looking for better solutions. US domestic violent extremism, however, is indeed a big problem. America leads the world in the ownership of private guns with more than 120 guns per 100 people. Very few countries have made gun ownership part of their constitution, but Mexico and Guatemala have. And even there are only 12 guns per 100 population. About half the citizens of the USA believe firearms aren't the problem. The problem is people who carry them. And according to them, the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is to have good guys with more or bigger guns. The National Rifle Association, NRA, according to an Al Jazeera report, has fooled the US public into believing guns make them safer. Whether that's true or not depends very much on who holds the gun. The Second Amendment is unlikely to change, so for the time being, people in America are entitled to carry guns and they are entitled to form disciplined militia. there are two impediments preventing any change to the Second Amendment. One is huge amounts of lobbying money from gun-supporting organizations such as the NRA, and the other is where the aforementioned Republican report might be wrong: patriot groups. In the opinion of many experts, these are and ought to be considered the greatest threat to national security. There's nothing wrong with being a patriot. Every country has them. But patriots come in several guises, from flag wavers to government usurpers and everything in between. Donald Trump famously asked one of these groups, the Proud Boys, to stand down and stand by. And the Proud Boys are designated as a terrorist group in New Zealand and Canada. Other patriot groups include the 3%ers, also a terrorist group in Canada, and the Oath Keepers. They're not designated as terrorists anywhere, but they are described by the Anti-Defamation League as anti-government extremists. All three of these groups will, if their websites are to be believed, fight to the death to keep their guns. And all three, Oath Keepers, 3%ers, and the Proud Boys, had people involved in, and now convicted of, offences during the US Capitol storming on the 6th of January. What's amazing to anyone who doesn't understand the intricacies of US law and its constitution is that despite members of each of them being convicted of sedition, none of these are registered as terrorists in the USA. And although they are labelled extremists, they're legally allowed to apply for charitable tax-deductible status. Oath Keepers and 3%ers have actually done so. The only one of the three of these not designated as terrorists anywhere, the Oath Keepers, claim to be defenders of the Constitution. And while some people call them white supremacists, they claim otherwise. Their website states they restrict membership to people who have no history of discrimination, violence, or hatred towards any person based on color, race, creed, etc. So it appears they validate this claim. However, the claim falls apart when their interviews and public statements are reviewed. The Southern Poverty Law Center, an organization specializing in compiling information on inequitable justice, have an Oath Keepers file which tells a very different story. They are assertively anti-China. They think Joe Biden is an illegitimate usurper and a Chinese agent. They further believe there is a Marxist conspiracy theory to flood the country with illegal immigrants, and they are expecting a wave of Islamic terrorist attacks. So if white supremacists is not a label we can apply to them, American supremacist certainly is. Evidence in support of the claim that they're extremists was heard in July 2022 when former Oath Keepers spokesman Jason Van Tatenhove testified to a congressional hearing that there was, in his mind, a genuine attempt at an armed revolution on the 6th of January. And while this might not have surprised many people, there is a lot more that will surprise. Not only has the Oath Keepers founder, Stuart Rhodes, been convicted of seditious conspiracy in relation to the 6th of January events, but according to an analyst by the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, more than 300 paid-up members and likely hundreds more work in departments that fall under the jurisdiction of Homeland Security, including one member who described himself as a 20-year veteran of the Secret Service who has worked for 2 presidents. Could it be any worse? It could. A leak of 38,000 member names was analyzed, and as reported by CBS News, it contained 370 members of current law enforcement agencies and over 100 serving military members. One of the people charged about the January 6 events was a retired US Navy Lieutenant Commander Thomas Caldwell, who claims no relationship to the Oath Keepers but was, according to court evidence, meeting with them in the evening prior to storming the Capitol. He not only held a top-secret security clearance, but he worked for the FBI as a section chief after his retirement. This information begs the question, how deep and how dangerous to society is extreme patriotism? when it's so common that it's infiltrated the law enforcement agencies that are being tasked to investigate it. America sends military around the globe searching for perceived threats to national security, but it admits the real threat they face is inside their own borders. Instead of looking for enemies outside, the US needs to clean its own front yard. It needs to look over its own shoulder and deep into the registered charities, security, intelligence, all the departments, because its demons are much closer to home than China. Thanks once again for watching Jerry's Take on China, and I'll see you next time. Please remember, like, share, subscribe. Let's get this message out.